Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. To join us, people who are leaving the other room, and we'll be live in just a minute. I'm also opening my own YouTube so that I can actually see you, which is good. Good morning. Actually, good morning. Good morning, Tivania. Hi, Marcelo. Good morning. You're going to see the same talk the same week. Good morning, Maristella. Very nice to see you around. Where are you guys from? One of the things I love about the from all places. Good morning, Juma. Good morning, Donadio. So nice to see you around. Uh, Donadio, I miss seeing you in our courses. Good morning, Marines. Hi, Andre. Hi, Clayton. Good morning. Oh, Rio. I really miss Rio, Clayton. Flavia, if you're from some cup of coffee with us. Arapongas, Paraná. I've never been to Arapongas. I've been to Paraná a few times, but never Arapongas. All right. Niterói. Oh, I've been to Niterói many times, Julia, and it's a beautiful city. Yeah, it's the view that you have from Niterói is amazing. Santa Cruz do Sul is also. I've been to Santa Cruz do Sul as well. Teresina is a fantastic place, isn't it? Beautiful weather. It's a bit hot, but it's a very nice city. All right, so let's get this started. Um, I would like to first of all to thank National Geographic Learning for sponsoring us. They are always super nice, and they've been amazing partners for the past several years, and we are really proud to be together with them in this journey to try and bring you a bit more learning opportunities. Yeah. So thank you very much, NetGeo, again. I would also like to thank SBS for inviting us. They do this so frequently and create these learning opportunities. So I'm really honored and proud to be here with you again. And I hope you have a nice time. Just a few, just to tell you a little bit about myself and what I am, what I do, what I don't. Paulo Dantas. I'm a teacher essentially. I'm an English teacher, and I've been teaching for uh, God. It's going to be 20 years now. I started teaching when I was 12, as you can see. Yeah, I was about 12. I'm also a materials writer and materials that are used in digital environments, and of course that took me to once I'd been writing materials for quite some time. I started editing materials, especially for digital platforms. So we've helped create apps and programs to help people. And I worked for a very long time as the e-learning manager for a big language center in Brazil, and I did that for a few years. So I helped uh, kind of like organize the learning environments and to devise, of course, the strategy of how students could benefit. And for the past few years, it's going to be 4 years now. I've been a managing partner at Troika. I was a founding partner. I've been there since day one, and we help teachers develop essentially. So we love having teachers with us, taking course, or sometimes a happy hour at the end of the day. So yeah, that's pretty much what I do, and the stuff that uh, routinely do. Just a few notes before we actually begin. Of course, you have your microphones on, already off. I don't think you can turn your camera on, but I can ask you to do something. If I say something that makes sense to you, uh, can I ask you to comment on the chat with some T's, just like I'm doing right now in the chat? So you should be able to see that. So if I say something that you like, um, I'm just going to ask you to comment with a bunch of T's like this, just so that I know that you are with me and that what I've said makes sense to you. Okay. All right. So, having said all of that, uh, begin this discussion about uh, considering, first of all, what you would regard as innovation and what innovation is and what innovation is not, because we can't really have a discussion about innovation if we don't say what innovation is. Definition for what innovation is. What is innovation for you? Can I ask you to comment on the chat box? Oh, is it okay? Uh, I noticed that my connection seems to be breaking up a little bit, so I'm just going to change my network. Oh, I love the definitions. Change of perspective, renew teaching, the introduction of something new. Nice, Marines. Thank you. Creativity, Katja. That's okay. That's an interesting definition as well. Knowledge. Thank you, Lirna. That's redesigning Jama. That's quite interesting as well. So as you can see, you are all, when you're thinking about innovation, you're all thinking about some. It brings that idea of doing things slightly differently, doing things in a different way, or bringing an element of novelty to what you're doing, right? But I want to share with you a little story, which is the story of our fantastic, beautiful vacuum cleaners. Um, I don't know if you have one. If you live, if you have, I have pets. I have a cat and a dog. So my life is not really possible without a vacuum cleaner. I really need it. And the interesting thing is that the vacuum cleaner has been around forever. Yeah, this is a newspaper ad for a vacuum cleaner from the 1920s. It was fairly cheap at the time, so it was roughly £7. And by the way, I'm sorry about the sexist ad that you have a woman vacuuming and everything, but hey, that was the 1920s. But the beautiful thing about the vacuum cleaner is that in the 1920s, it was solving a problem, right? You have a house that wasn't so clean, and you wanted uh, to get rid of the dust, right? So you had a very clear problem and a very clear solution. So your home was not clean, and the solution for that, it was to vacuum the house. So the vacuum cleaner was relevant then, and it is relevant now, right? So I think one of the best definitions that I have for what innovation is that so the vacuum cleaner was relevant 100 years ago, and it is still relevant now. And essentially, it's quite interesting that if you look at the most modern vacuum cleaner that we have these days, those little robots that I mean, you can program them, and they will kind of like self clean your home. um they are very modern and everything, but essentially they do the same job that the vacuum cleaner that we can see in the ad did, right? So it's essentially, it is about, vacuuming. It's a very simple primary function. So because it has remained relevant, it really has stood the test of time, because it is solving a problem that we had then, and it is still solving a problem that we have now. Let me try and change my connection here, see if things get a bit better. Hang on. Okay, I hope we are back. I'm keeping an eye on the chat box, so if you guys experience any technical difficulties regarding my, okay. All right. So what we established here is that if you want to really innovate, you need to remain relevant, just like a vacuum cleaner managed to do. So I think another very interesting element that really has to the test of time, it is the good old paperclip, right? I can't think of anything simpler than a paperclip. Actually, I wasn't looking for one, but I can see about 25 right in front of me. Um, and it's quite interesting. I mean, I wouldn't expect to see the ad for newspaper clip, because it's such a mundane thing. You just have paper clips, you know, around. But the thing is, we've always had, at least for the past 100 years or so, we've always had the need of getting, two, three, five pieces of paper together and put them together, and and bind them, but not permanently. So because this need being present, we've always had the need to solve the problem. So then again, the paperclip, just as the vacuum cleaner, essentially has remained relevant throughout times. And I would say that these products, they are highly, they are very simple solutions to fairly complicated problems. And I think most interestingly, they have very little technology. You can still claim that the vacuum cleaner will have some technology, but the paper clip is essentially just a bent piece of wire. So it's as simple as something could get. So I'm telling you this because innovation and technology, they are not really the same thing. While there is an overlap between technology and innovation, and very often you will find that innovation is technology is solving a problem nowadays, right? We don't a balance anymore. We just open the app. You don't wave your hand to get a taxi. Uh, Mostly, you call an Uber or a 99 or whatever it is that you use, but essentially we use a digital service for that. Most of us know or use Netflix or these streaming services. So yes, technology is there, and it can bring innovation, but they're not the same thing. And bringing that story specifically to English language teaching, let me tell you something. So we get quite often the idea that, okay, we now have a new app for learning how to speak the language beautifully. This is not exactly the case, and I want to tell you the story of Curso de Inglês Block. That this I don't know if you were old enough to have seen this. If you are, you were really old, because those were really popular in the 1960s. So that means that, but if essentially this is This was a very straightforward way to help people learn English, right? So you would go to a newsstand and then you would get one of those little books, and it would come with a long play record inside, right? Uh, and you would listen to the model and then repeat the model and do a few exercises, and then you would post that and get some feedback from the teacher, right? And this was highly popular, and it remained popular for essentially the birth of audiolingualism in the 1960s or so, right? So it was a big novelty, and it was a departure from the older and more well-established methods and approaches in English language teaching. That it really required a teacher to be in the room with a number of students to help them, etc., etc. This specifically, the audiolingual method, it really World War II, it really helped a lot of people who had no access to learning a new language to learn a new language, right? And then we think, okay, but that was in the 1950s, and it's no longer popular. Let's see. Um, about 30 years ago, Rosetta Stone appeared. It first came out. You familiar with it? They are a very, very, very um, and they've existed in many shapes and forms. Um, they first begun with those CD-ROMs, and then after that, you could get their courses online. And nowadays, there is the app. But essentially, it is the same product, which is not too different from this product. What you do in Rosetta Stone is that you have a bunch of videos, and then you have a few exercises, and then you listen, and then you repeat. It's very much fundamented in the audiolingual method, and you could buy it at the airports in the U.S. That's true, Isabella. That's true. That's true. But essentially, it's quite interesting that then you get this product. That's Duolingo. It is very much the same as Rosetta Stone, which is not in its turn too different from the Aprenda Inglês, o método mais prático, right? It is essentially the same product, and it has, right? But in its essence, it is the same. Are they innovative products? I'm not really sure. I would say that they are essentially the same product in new packaging. There is a difference, though, and there is a difference why nowadays and why Duolingo is worth so much money. If you scan this QR code, it will take you to a Forbes article, and in this article, it's Duolingo and Rosetta Stone. Because although Rosetta Stone's been around for 30 years and Duolingo's barely been around for 10, Duolingo is regarded as a much bigger company, and it's worth, I think, 3 times more than Rosetta Stone. And they compare why this is the case. But in another, because essentially they've managed to understand what the client, and in this case, the client is the student, wants, and to embrace those needs and deliver those needs in a pretty nice, cool, gamified way, which is different from Rosetta Stone, right? So those differences, they account for the user experience, and the user experience in the end makes a lot of difference. Um, but essentially, if you think about the product itself, the product hasn't really changed. It is just not too different from this product, which you might have seen. I don't know if you like Lego, if you like Lego blocks. I've always been in love with them. I've really loved them since I was a kid. And Lego blocks, they've been around for about 50 years, and they really haven't changed but it's also highly innovative because it is a blank canvas. And blank canvases, they tend to be highly innovative if you have good monitoring, if you have good strategies around them. So this is very much like good teaching. If you have good teaching, then it can be highly innovative. We don't really need to we don't need not to use technology. We just need to understand why and where we are using technology. You might be familiar with the summer model, and I really like it because it structures the role that technology should play in. It was first used in the 1990s by Dr. Ruben Puentedura, fantastic researcher. He currently works at the MIT. If you haven't seen his work, I highly recommend it. And he says that technology essentially plays two main roles in our classes, right? So we can enhance, we can transform the learning experience. Um, and within those two different roles, there are two other roles, there are two elements that they can be brought uh, by technology. So the first one is the idea that technology can something. So for example, when you get a text, right, and instead of handing out uh, photocopies to each student, you just send them the PDF. So technology here is very much direct substitute. There is no functional change. This is the simplest use of technology. And it doesn't really change the learning experience. The learning experience is essentially the same. There is no, there might be a bit of novelty and fireworks, but it doesn't really change how people learn. And it has little impact in learning outcomes, right? Now, the next level is the level of augmentation. So technology is still a substitute, but there is no change there. So, for example, let's say that instead of having to send each and every one of you the link for something, I could instead have a QR code here and ask you all to access the link. So, the final thing, the final product here, it would still that document I wanted you to have. But my life as a teacher would be much easier because I don't have to send each and every one of you a link to the file I wanted to share with you. Right. So in that sense, it just makes my life easier. So by augmentating those elements, I'm enhancing my lessons. I'm not my lesson is not terribly different. It's better. It is enhanced, right? But the learning experience itself is not really reshaped. Now, the magic really happens when we start transforming our lessons. So, how lessons? Well, the next level in the summer model is the level of modification. So, the technology that we use, it allows for a task redesign. What is this? We consider the tasks that we do with our students, the activities that we do with our shape those activities in a way that they are different because we are using technology. Just to give you a very simple example of something that we've all done. When we are teaching directions, for example, we always have in the course book, you will find a map, right? Look to practice directions. Now that's very nice, very relevant, but at the same time, it's very blunt, isn't it? Because that map doesn't really tell a story. It is, it's a random map, probably made up by a designer. Now, if you simply ask students to, okay, get your phones and show me using Google Maps or Waze or whatever it is, and then you ask students to ask for and give directions using their phones or in an actual map, um, then you make that activity, you turn that activity into something that's a bit more memorable, something that's a bit more relevant, because students are actually talking about their lives. They're actually using their map. It is something that they're likely to use in their real lives, rather than something that doesn't tell them a story. This is not a big boom or something extraordinary. It's a very simple task redesign, but essentially you're using uh, the technology here as your ally to change an activity, to change a task in order to make it more meaningful. Now, if you want to make a big boom, we go for the redefinition level, which is when technology allows for the creation of a new task, which would be inconceivable if you didn't have the idea, or if you didn't have a certain tool, or if you didn't have that technology. So, for example, let's say different level, right? So um, you ask students. There is a function in Google Maps which is really nice. I don't know if you've used it. You can actually pinpoint in the map and edit a map so that you create your own personalized map with your points of interest. So in that sense, you can very much ask your students to work in group and create a personalized map, right? For that group with their own points of interest, perhaps in their neighborhood or in their city or in a place that they would like to visit. And as a to record a little audio message uh, describing each of those places that they've pinpointed in the map. And then in the end, you could get one of the students to put all of those audio files together and create a little podcast show to a visitor or a foreigner coming to their city, introducing their city to someone else, right? So essentially, it's a very simple use of technology. So basically, you're using tools that are already available, but you are thinking about a task modification that would be here. Students recording the audio and sending the audio to you, and then other students editing that audio and putting it together. And then if you ask me, but Paulo, isn't that too complex? Not really, because you might have noticed that on purpose, I didn't really mention any specific tool apps. I mean, I mentioned Google, but that's something very straightforward and mundane, something that we are essentially most of us are quite used to it, right? So, our job as teachers is not to know a lot about technology. Our job as teachers is to understand how technology can impact the tasks that we design for learning. Because what we want to avoid essentially is this. Many schools now they use an interactive whiteboard. I personally love the impact that uh, interactive whiteboards can have in our classrooms. I think they can be very powerful tools for learning. But if you look at this photo, I think for a variety of reasons. First of all, this photo is actually I stole it from the brochure of a vendor in it's essentially a company that sells interactive whiteboards, and I thought it was quite significant because of all the suggestions. Closely for a minute or two, what do we see? We see students sitting in rows, one behind the other, right? Then there is a teacher who seems to be incredibly happy about teaching maths, and I think that's fake because yeah, I've never that would never be the case for me. Um, and then probably she asked one of the students to come to the front of the class and do that operation there. So it's a 7 times 4, 4 times 7, whatever. And then if you think of the tool as okay, essentially we costs 10 reais, right? I have mine that I absolutely love. It costs 10 reais, and it was a xing-ling. It's a, a very simple object that you just go and you buy it anywhere. And it's a one job tool, right? A calculating machine will only do maths. So why is a student to come to the front of the class to do something that could be done in a simpler way, that it could be done faster and probably more effectively and touching fewer buttons, uh, using the interactive whiteboard? So you see, you it is what the interactive whiteboard is. It's a fantastic tool. But you were turning the interactive whiteboard into a calculating machine that essentially costs 10 reais in the nearest Xing shop right next to you. And it really puzzles me why we would do that. And I was giving this why it is that we end up just using technology, uh, as a substitution for something that exists already, and with no or very little functional improvement. And usually, or the creation of new tasks. So essentially, we end up not using the technology to transform our lessons or to innovate. We end up using technology just to enhance our lessons. So I was like, why is it that we are not using technology in a way that allows us as teachers to innovate in our classrooms? And then this occurred to me. uh, four different classrooms, and I promise you this is not one of those, okay, compare this old classroom to this new classroom, what has changed. This is not the case. But it really puzzled me that in the first photo you can see a medieval classroom. You have some monks, students right behind the other, and they're all watching the monk and copying, right? That was that It's not a photograph, of course. That illustration is from the 14th century. And then you have this second teacher, who is a teacher in a Victorian school in England at the turn of the last century. The context is not too different. So you have a bunch of students all copying. And then if you go to classroom 3, it is not too different from the other two classrooms, right? You still have, it is slightly different. So that's a school in the 1970s in the US. You have a bunch of students, one sitting behind the other. Now, there is a tiny little novelty here, which is students, they are sharing a desk. And in that sense, I think that's quite interesting because perhaps those students could be talking to each other. Um, and in picture number 4, you still see students sitting one behind the other. Now, the sitting arrangement is slightly different, uh, because you have two groups of students. They're facing each other. The notebooks with tablets. But there is another element which I thought that was quite interesting. In all of those photographs, you can very much clearly see that the teacher is standing, right? The teacher is very clearly the figurehead. It is the most prominent element in the photograph. You can see that the teacher is facing the other students. In the second photograph, in the second and fourth photographs, you can see that the women are standing. The same as in the third photograph, but then the teacher is standing at the back of the room. So you can very clearly tell who the person responsible for the learning there is. So as you can see, the point here is that the last photograph could have been taken last week. This photograph is a few years old, but it could have been taken last week. You have an interactive whiteboard, a bunch of students holding their iPads, etc. Is that we have roughly 7 centuries between the first and the fourth images, and yet they are so similar. So little has changed. And then The pandemic came, right? So we've all changed how we teach and all those things, and we've been complaining for about 2 years now. So we turned those classrooms into this, which is the same, except that now they are not physically there. They are in different little windows. But essentially, it is pretty much the same format. One person sitting right next to the other, and the teacher who's responsible for managing the whole thing, for managing and being the authoritative figure there. Um, and it's quite interesting that we Middle Ages, and we've managed to turn the thing that was quite popular in the Middle Ages and turn this into a screen environment. So it is. I was talking. I talked to a few dozen teachers during the pandemic to hear what they were thinking of their learning experiences and how teaching was for them during the pandemic. And it was quite interesting that most of them seemed to be very uncomfortable with the idea that they were uh, in the face-to-face environment, were not working in an online environment. And if you think about it, it's of course it's not going to work, because when you are in a room, in a physical room, as a teacher, you are very much like an orchestra conductor, isn't it? So you have group of students, different groups of students. They are all working in different things. They might be working in slightly different things. So you have a group here who's chatting, and then the other group who's actually paying attention, and then you have another group who's listening to you and taking notes, etc. And you are somehow managing everything that's happening there. And the final product of this is not exactly a symphony, but is learning, right? And we are very much used to that format. Now, when you bring that to an online environment, although you might see square boxes, you don't really know what people are doing. You can't manage what's happening, right? You have absolutely no control. People could, for us, I mean, all that you can tell, they could be watching Netflix, and you would never know. It's absolutely impossible to tell what would be happening there. Which is why sometimes I think it's really crazy that some schools they'll only tell students have been to class because they've appeared in their Zoom environment. So we turned our physical classroom into this online classroom, but we didn't reshape the learning experience. And this has, you know, quite dramatic consequences. And I want to share with you this quote because I really think this is true. I think the classroom as we know it is dead. It's the concept of classroom does not make sense anymore. We can't replicate our routines, our face-to-face routines in an online environment, and the face-to-face routines that we have, they don't make a lot of sense anymore. Why is it? Well, because the format of the teacher being the figurehead who is broadcasting knowledge does not make sense anymore. uh, I don't know how good at grammar you are, but if I have to tell you all the rules for articles in English, the use of our articles, I am going to fail. I have to stop and think for a moment because there are so many intrinsicies that I really have to stop and think. While on the other hand, if a student gets his phone and types on Google rules for articles, there will be literally hundreds of thousands of web pages telling them exactly what they need to know. So our role as teachers has changed, and we really need to accept that. And in that sense, I want to share with you the words from Silvio Mater. He's a fantastic researcher. He's Brazilian, and he's the head of Porto Digital, which is a leading IT hub in Recife. And he says, I can't agree more when he says that with the pandemic, we had this great opportunity to learn that the classroom and its lessons in the way that they are devised, they are no longer effective, neither offline nor online. And for us, I think saying that we need to go back to the classrooms as they were, and the practices that we have embraced for the past few centuries, it makes very, very little sense, right? So education, as we know it, and its foundations, its methods, its processes, and platforms, they really need to change. And they need to change because the way we perceive knowledge and the way that we acquire knowledge, and it doesn't matter if it is a language or other subjects, it has changed, and we need to be okay with that. And I think very much in line with what Siva said, I want to share with you this quote by Vanderberger. uh, Teachers who are engaged in this process of change, we must go through a process of learning ourselves. So we need to learn new skills, accept new principles, experiment with new materials, and incorporate new knowledge, right? So innovation must be considered a process, not an event in itself. So innovation is not okay, I bought a new tablet. Okay, I bought a new interactive whiteboard. So innovation is not the event itself. It is the process that we as teachers undergo so that we can understand the impact of those new elements in the processes of learning and teaching, and then redesign our students' learning experiences in a way that they are more meaningful and that they will bring more results and that they will make our students more engaged. And I think for that, we need to be not just familiar, but we need to embrace and understand the idea that learning, education, and schooling are very different things. Learning can happen anywhere. Learning can happen through observation. So, well, rumor has it that Newton discovered the theory of gravity because an apple fell on his head. Of course, I don't know if that anecdote is true, but learning did occur there. So we observe learning. Learning can happen just by observing how things happen around you. Uh, Education, differently from structured fashion, it is learning that happens within a certain structure. Now, the idea of schooling is very different. Schooling is what happens at school. You can go to school for years and years and still learn very little. And I think a very clear evidence of that, it is our schools in Brazil. When we look at the rates for literacy and maths literacy as well, in kids in year two, three, four, that often kids can barely read, although they are schooled. They've been uh, uh, going to school regularly, but their education failed because there was very little learning. Right. So we need to understand that, and I love this quote by Einstein when he says that education is what remains when we have forgotten what we learned at school. And by all measures and by all accounts, Einstein, you can see his this actually this is his report card. You can see that Einstein was actually not a very good student. I mean, he wasn't a bad student. Just in his defense, the top grade you could get, it was six. Okay, but you can see that in many grades he was an average student. So, for example, in French he got three. In Italian he got five. He was okay in geometry and physics, etc. But in chemistry, for example, and natural history, he didn't score very highly, and the same goes for even maths. Um, so in terms of schooling, he was average. In terms of learning, on the other hand, he was very different. He was a much better student. So just to wrap up here, so learning is the cognitive process of acquiring new skills or knowledge, while education is the process of acquiring this knowledge in formal learning and instruction, and finally schooling that puts them together. So it's the process of being formally educated in a school, right? Uh, so far, innovation and technology, they're not the same thing. They're very different thing. Effective, relevant tools are often quite simple, but not simplistic. We had a quick look at what the summer model is. Uh, we realized that our teaching model is medieval, literally medieval, and education and learning, they do not necessarily require schooling, right? So what to tell you here is that we don't need a lot of technology to innovate. What we need to innovate is sound teaching practices that they think about learning outcomes before thinking about the tools. It makes very little sense that we embrace a lot of new gadgets without realizing the impact that that will have in our students' learning experiences. We need to first consider their learning experiences and the whys we are doing things. And when we look at the use of that technology in our classroom, we need to make sure that we are not just enhancing the learning experience. We need to be looking at the transformation side of the learning experience. What is the transformation side of the opportunities? Through new tasks, through new activities that they would be inconceivable without the use of technology. And that often implies students producing content and students sharing content. It goes a little bit further than just using an online multiple choice quiz, because a multiple choice quiz can be done in paper. You are just going to be either at the substitution or modification level. So if we're constantly just trying um, to substitute paper without considering new opportunities, then we are not innovating. So innovation is remaining relevant. And if we are trying just to replace paper or to replace what we already do by the use of a new tool or a new gadget or a new app, we are not really innovating. We need to detach ourselves from this idea of we as teachers being the broadcasters of uh, content and knowledge, because if our lesson could have been, I always think of that whenever I teach or whenever I observe a lesson. uh, if that lesson could have been a YouTube talk or a YouTube lecture, it was a bad lesson, right? A good lesson students actively in considering and questioning and debating and commenting and sharing their views in a variety of topics. And the beautiful aspect of this is that as language teachers, our core is that we are in English. And the content they use to communicate is very much open to our call. We can decide the topics students work with. So we have, as we say, we have a fac occasion amont, essentially, right? We can actually decide the content of our lessons because content to deliver language learning. So we can actually embrace a lot of innovations, and we can think of new opportunities, and we can focus on a variety of different things while we're using those new tools without just embracing the idea of, okay, I'm just going to substitute one thing for another. We need to consider new and essentially I think it is very, 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 very important that we consider this, that change is inevitable and there will be new tools, new apps, new services all the time. That's what the consideration around our lesson planning and how we organize our students' learning and the perception of our own role as managers of learning and teaching is not going to change. So we need to consider that the tools are going to change, but the way we think about our lessons should not change, right? We should always that I'm going to organize these activities? How is it that I'm going to organize this learning process so that my students are further engaged, so that I innovate, not because I'm bringing a new tool or a new service, but because the thinking around the lesson is innovative, right? So I think we have a few more moments, and I'm going to open for questions. So if you have any questions, any comments that you want to make in the chat box, I'm keeping an eye there so that I can make any remarks. Rodrigo, will the slides be available? That's a very good question. If you ask me for the slides on our Instagram at Troika, I can make it available for you. I'm sharing our Instagram in the chat box. You can just follow us, and then I can send you the slides if you want them. And do you have any questions, comments, anything that you want to share with us? Oh, thank you. Terribly kind. Thank you, Marcelo, again. Lena, I'm putting it there again. It's Troika .br on Instagram. Okay. Yeah, it is, Rodrigo. I think pretty much every I mentioned the summer model because although it's been around for quite some time, I think it is really important that we really embrace it so that we can assess the impact and understand a little bit better the role that technology has in our classrooms. Yeah. All right. Thank um, National Geographic Learning once again for sponsoring this, and SBS for organizing this chat. I hope we can continue this conversation in our Instagram. So just make sure that you follow us there. And I hope to see you again sometime soon, very shortly, preferably face to face. Right. So have a great day. I think you have a few more sessions before the day's out. Actually, a lot more sessions before the day is out. Yeah. Okay. So thank you very, very much.